Well, hello, friends. Welcome to this fantastic conversation today with Dr. Terry Wahls, joining me for the second time. In our last conversation, we got into Dr. Wahls' very interesting story of healing herself from the debilitating symptoms of multiple sclerosis that had her in a wheelchair for years. She's got a viral TED Talk all about that. We talked a lot about medical issues and healing. So this time around, we want to go into Dr. Wahls, the person, a bit deeper so that you can connect to the real human inside her. When a person is so prominent for a special talent, we tend to focus more on their accomplishments and less on who they are. But when I talk to Dr. Wahls, I can see her eyes and I can feel her energy. And there's so much there. She's truly one of the most beautiful people I've ever spoken to, because her amazing contributions to mankind have everything to do with her, the human. And there is the little girl who grew up working hard on a farm and saw some harsh realities there. There's the mother of two wonderful children and the wife of a wife. There is a woman pulling weeds in her garden, a woman standing at a counter making kimchi for her family to keep herself and them healthy. She does all those ordinary things despite being such an extraordinary force in the world of healing, literally changing the lives of millions with her studies, programs, and books. She has a study coming up, and she needs more participants for that. So we will be looking for people who are diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and we'll talk a bit about that study as well in this conversation, having to do with diet. By watching her journey, I have seen her fight, and I've seen her cry, and I want to get to know another side of her today, Terry Wahls, the person, because you might find that you are just like her in a lot of ways. And I know I am. And man, she inspires me. I'm actually tearing up to do the good work in the world. Welcome, Dr. Wahls. I'm so grateful to have you back.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I've taken your recent course on remyelination because it's something I'm working on in my body. And I noticed that you are starting to include more of your personal story in your work, sharing photos of your family and yourself as a child. Why do you think it's important for people to connect to people and get that relationship built, particularly when they are on a healing journey?
For as long as humans have had language, we've been telling each other stories. And I think stories are how we learn. It's how we learn most effectively in medical school. There's case-based learning all around a story, and then you learn the pathology. But I can remember the pathology and the biochemistry if I have a story to link it to. So I've come to appreciate that as I teach the public. If I include story, then they can remember the concepts that I'm teaching. It's a lot more fun. Basically, I love telling stories. It's a lot more fun.
It is, and you're very good at it. So let's start out with a story. When were you born? What was the year you were born?
1955.
All right.
I was born in the McGregor Hospital, okay, which would have been on the Mississippi River. My mom milked cows, and then she and my dad drove over to the Marquette Hospital, and I was born there.
So was she in labor while she was milking the cows?
Most likely, yes.
She had to finish that.
Yep, had to get that finished.
Oh my gosh, I love that story. That's kind of characterizing the whole life on a farm for you, right?
That is the life on the farm. You got work to do and you're going to get it done.
Now, is your farm both animals and plants, or what kind of things did you?
It was a family farm, 200 acres. We rented another 200 acres. We had about 20 head dairy cows, mostly Holstein, so those were black and white cows. Then we had a herd of beef cattle, probably another 30 head of beef cows that would have calves that you would sell off in the fall. And I think my dad probably had about 25 sows. Those are female pigs that would have piglets, I think 3 or 4 times a year, and he would sell those pigs. But then he also started keeping some of those pigs and fattening the pigs up for slaughter and selling them. We would have hay ground. We would have corn ground. We never really grew soybeans, but we'd rotate between alfalfa and corn. When I was really young, you fertilized some, but it was mostly crop rotation so that you would have a field in hay ground because you would have more alfalfa, which fixes nitrogen and improves the quality of the soil. And then you spread the manure from the pigs and the cows onto the pastures that we were rotating the dairy herd on.
That's really fascinating how the farm is really a metaphor for the cycle of life and how one thing feeds another.
Oh, and absolutely. And I think my parents, my grandparents, they all understood the microbiome, that you had to take care of the soil. You put the poop from the animals onto the soil. That really improves the soil. And if your animals got the scours, which was the word for diarrhea, that could devastate the herd. It's super interesting that it was the traditional Chinese medicine that talked about fecal transplants as giving poop, solid poop, to animals that were having diarrhea to reset their microbiome. And that was the inspiration for the earliest fecal transplants.
That's amazing. Did you find that in that time when you were younger, 50s and 60s, that you were using a lot of chemical treatments on your farm or less?
I do know that I remember helping replant corn, kernels that had flooded out, and had been treated probably with mercury, looking back on this. It's sort of shocking, as a fungicide, and we're all handling these seeds, putting them in. And I'm thinking like, okay, so was that a sizable exposure that my brothers and I got? And as we helped replant that, my dad would have to do some spraying of the broadleaf weeds, the thistles in his pastures, and I would help with that. And so no doubt I had some pesticide exposure. We were not an organic farm. And so, yes, we were being exposed. And furthermore, I want people to know that in Iowa and across the Midwest, most of the private wells have been contaminated with the compound atrazine, which is a pesticide, which has been banned in Europe for decades because of its untoward health effects.
Yeah. So even organic farms in that area using well water would have exposure to some chemicals, you think?
Anyone with a private well in Iowa is going to have exposures probably to atrazine and in many other pesticides. Mm-hmm. And then the question can come up: what are your municipal waters testing for and removing? So I stress to my followers, if you can find a way to filter your water and your air, I think there's tremendous benefits for doing so.
I agree. I do both.
I do both as well.
Thank you for bringing that up. And especially when we're growing up, I think in the time when I grew up, I was born in 66. I'm a little bit younger, but we didn't worry about these things. It wasn't top of mind at all.
Well, and we're beginning to become aware that some compounds cause cancer. And I remember my mom shrugging her shoulders saying, well, I guess everything causes cancer. And there are a lot of things that cause cancer, a lot of things that increase the risk of mental health problems, of autoimmune problems. Rather than just shrug and say, well, everything does. My invitation is do what you can, but according to what is your economic reality.
Yeah, good advice. So as a child, you had all these animals coming and going from your farm. Did you form any attachments to any animals growing up?
Of course. We loved our barn cats. We had dogs, and we named our cows. I had a little pony, Star, a Shetland pony. He was lots of fun. Then we got a Pony of America, an Appaloosa, is quite a bit taller. Not a big horse, but still lovely, lovely horse. And so we had a couple of horses, and we were very attached to our animals.
Do you have any stories from the farm? Any kind of cool or weird or funky stories to tell us?
So we had my pony Star. Then my brother won a pregnant mare. So it meant we were going to have her and her baby. So first baby was Misty, second baby was Stormy, third baby was Paladin. And my oldest brother trained Misty. Then I started training Stormy. He took a little too long, so then I started training her. And the horses they became attached to me because I was the one spending the most time with them. And so then they would let me ride, and they'd be sort of spunky when my brothers would try to ride them. And that really annoyed my two older brothers.
So it was you, your two older brothers. Were there any other siblings in the family?
Well, when I was 9, well, when I was 8, soon to be 9, my mom was pregnant, my sister was born, and she died the day that she was born. In retrospect, the RH factor was part of this. It was certainly very, very traumatic for my parents. My mom had severe postpartum depression. And this led to, I'd say, a really immense amount of pain for both my parents. And it really changed family life for my family, for my brothers and myself. In retrospect, I realized that certainly was an adverse childhood experience that would go on for many years because it took that long for us to recover from the depth of pain. And when a family loses a child dies within the family, it's very difficult for that family. The two parents rarely recover at the same time.
Mm.
And so that uneven recovery is difficult to navigate. The depth of pain is difficult to navigate. Other children in the family have a hard time understanding what's going on, what happened.
Do you remember any conversations, or do you remember that day? What happened? What took place?
Well, I remember going to my sister's funeral. So it was my dad, my mother's in the hospital, her parents are there, my two brothers, and there's this little itty bitty tiny coffin, and she has beautiful red hair, lots of red hair, and a beautiful little dress. And so I remember that.
Yeah, that's very sad. I'm sorry. So your parents were farmers. Were your grandparents all also farmers?
Mm-hmm. Yes, both sets of grandparents were farmers.
And what about even going back further? Were you always a farming family?
Well, it's interesting. I know Johann Friedrich, who changed his name to John Frederick, came over from Germany. He apparently was a carpenter, and he had used what resources he had, and plus signed up to be an indentured servant for 10 years. So he could bring his wife and his two sons over, and came over to, I believe, New Orleans, Louisiana. However, his wife and two children died of cholera. So here's a man who's lost everything, and he has to find a way to go forward. He does remarry, and he buys some land in Northeast Iowa from people who sold their land to go homestead in Oklahoma. And when he dies, he owns a square mile of land. So he worked hard. He was very successful. And I think that's an example of amazing resilience that, when I have conferences and I ask people what would be the most difficult thing to face, I'd say uniformly it's loss of family, loss of spouse and children. And that's what this man had to face. And he had to find a way to go forward.
Yeah, it's an ongoing theme, it seems, in your family.
We have to find a way to go forward, and it's not easy.
Yeah. So you have talked about the fact that your father had neurological issues as well. He had pain in his legs, I believe, right?
Right. He has something called mononeuritis multiplex. It's an autoimmune disease affecting the nerves. I'd asked my neurologist if his disease and my disease were related. They said, of course, no. And from a conventional understanding of medicine, they're not. His is a peripheral nerve problem. Mine is a central nervous system problem. But from a but at that time, I thought, no, they're related. And I thought, we have the same disease. We probably have the same disease process. And now for my functional medicine lens, I'm much less interested in a specific diagnosis. I let the conventional world take care of the diagnoses. I'm much more interested in the biochemical processes, the modifiable lifestyle factors, your antecedents, your major symptoms, and how I can help you create a better microenvironment for yourselves, one small action at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you remember your father having these symptoms before the loss of your sister?
Well, now keep in mind, I'm 8.
Hmm.
So it's not like an 8-year-old that's going to pay attention to these things. But what I do think is noteworthy is that when I'm 12, it's very clear that he's beginning to have problems with pain in his legs. Maybe I was 11 at that time, 11 or 12. So it's a couple years after this enormous loss that my father endured that he's beginning to have symptoms. The way I put that together is his cortisol, his adrenal stress hormones, were certainly driven up by the loss and the grief that he's felt when his daughter died. And then probably, the very deep concern he has for his wife, who's having severe depression, and trying to figure out his kids, his surviving kids, how that's going to work. And the financial world for small family farms in the 60s and early 70s is not so rosy either. So there's all sorts of stress going on in his life that certainly would accelerate whatever autoimmune processes were going on.
Do you think that autoimmune is always preceded by stress of some sort?
It's when I look at my clinical research and I look at my clinical practice, I would say every patient, when I talk with them and I say in the previous 18, 24 months that you had your first diagnosis, your first flare that led to the diagnosis, or the major acceleration of your disease process, they can always find what was the severe stress, family stress, work stress, financial stress. And I explain that that's often what unmasks what had been sort of smoldering that your body could contain. But finally, with a severe stress, the disease process has been accelerated enough that your body's compensatory mechanisms are no longer adequate.
Right. And then what seems to happen is it's not enough to just reduce the stress. You have to attack it from, and I don't like to use the word attack, but I guess address it
You're going to
from a variety of places, right?
Now there's enough damage that we'll devise a very comprehensive program.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about diet, exercise, targeted supplements. But that's when I bring up that, okay, stress was a trigger. Nearly always, it's a huge trigger that led to the getting diagnosed. Finding a stress-reducing practice. And there are many from which that we can choose. Yeah, and my preference is that people have a wide variety of stress-reducing practices that they're doing. That you could do heart math, you could do other biofeedback, spend time in your garden, forest bathing, Epsom salts, taking saunas, gratitude practices. But if we don't do something to help engage that stress-reducing practice to get more into the parasympathetic state, you're not going to heal.
Yeah.
Because if we're stuck in that sympathetic state, that fight or flight, the switch for my cellular resources are pointed towards getting ready to fight like hell or flee as fast as I can. And all of my cellular resources are switched away from being able to repair. I can't make hormone as well. I can't detoxify as well. And I'm not going to be able to rebuild my tissues.
So there are biological reasons why we want to address our symptoms from a place of love and understanding and compassion for ourselves.
It's very important.
Yeah, that's why I was reluctant to use the word attack, because when I think about symptoms that I experience over time, I am always working to move away from feelings of wanting to be angry about it or frustrated about it and move into feelings of saying, all right, if my symptoms were being experienced by myself as a little baby, how would I treat the baby? I wouldn't be angry. I'd be loving.
It makes me recall when I was an intern and you get calls in the middle of the night for things they need a physician's order to address or you have to come assess. And sometimes the calls were for pretty stupid things. I used to get really annoyed and angry. And then finally, it occurred to me that, well, if I let myself get angry, then I can't fall back to sleep.
So
So,
true.
so like, okay, this is not serving you very well. So you need to, however silly these calls are, not be annoyed by them.
That's
Because
right.
if you're annoyed, you will not go back to sleep.
Yeah.
So if
It
I'm
has,
not annoyed and I get a call at 2 a.m., then I can fall back to sleep. If I'm annoyed at 2 a.m. when I get a call, I will still be awake at 6 a.m. and I will have missed 4 hours of sleep. I'm embarrassed to say that it took me most of my internship year to have that aha.
well, it's a hard lesson to learn because it's
Yeah,
really an impulse that we have to go into that feeling of anger. It's normal, it's
it's,
natural, but you have to get in control of
you know,
yourself and bring it back.
in most of our brain, and this is another interesting tidbit, most of your brain tissue is inhibitory. It
Mm.
is calming that reactive brain, that first impulse, that which was that was a stupid call. You should not have called me. That really annoyed. And what I needed to do was to reinforce all those inhibitory neurons that were trying to say, Terry, let it go, let it go. You'll want to get back to sleep. It's not a big deal. She doesn't know. She needs your help. Just let it go. Most of our brain is inhibitory. It gives us the context for that bit of information to realize within context, now I could make a better choice that will serve me and my family and my community more effectively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that could be extrapolated to lots of situations in life as well. So just go back a little bit and I want to find out, what were you like as a teenager?
Well, I really liked being outside. I liked being on the wild parts of the farm. I would ride with my horse through the meadows, through the fields, along the creeks. I liked foraging. Yule Gibbons was a author who wrote a bunch of books, Stalking the Wild Asparagus. And so I was very keen on finding wild foods and bringing them back and serving them. My mother would never let me bring back mushrooms. She didn't trust, because if you make a mistake with mushrooms, that could be, really quite serious. And so I was very much into being outside. I was not as engaged with my older brothers. I read a lot. I wanted to be outside. I also did a lot of drawing. I would carry notebooks with me and did sketching of plants, sketching of my horses, livestock, cattle, etc.
I love that. It sounds very peaceful. Were you alone a lot? Did you enjoy spending time alone?
I'm an introvert, so I have a few close friends. And on the farm, you get, all summer long, you're doing work. There are a few neighbors you'd spend some time with, but during the academic year, you would see kids at school. But it's not like I could bike down the street to friends in the neighborhood.
Okay. So your farm was a little bit isolated from the other kids.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah. And so it sounds to me like you must have been in great shape as a teenager. Were
Well,
you
because
involved in sports and stuff too?
well, the sports of throwing a lot of hay around. And although in high school, I did play softball a couple seasons, I played basketball some. Then when I went to college, I missed all the physical activity from the farm. I started long distance running. I discovered martial arts. I really enjoyed martial arts and got into full contact free sparring, competed nationally, competed in the Pan American trials, full contact free sparring. That was before protective gear, really.
Wow.
So, you got 2 points for kicking people in the head, 1 point for punching them in the chest. And so I gave a lot of concussions, and I had a few myself. And was that part of why I developed my first set of neurologic symptoms in medical school? Perhaps. When I entered medical school, I realized, I probably shouldn't have people kicking me in the head. And so I quit competing in full contact free sparring.
And you did start to notice those neurological symptoms in college, in your early 20s, right?
In medical school, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And that started in the face.
Yeah. It starts at the temple, electrical jolts down behind the eye, down the jaw, mostly on the right, very occasionally on the left. Started in 1980 and would go on for 20 years. Then I, get diagnosed with MS in 2000.
Mm.
And, they would continue to worsen. And then in, the fall of 2007, I redesigned my program, and I began to have much better control of my pain.
And that involves a lot of work with diet and lifestyle. Even back then, you realized that.
Well, I wanted to be doing all that I could. And during medical school, and that's when fat was bad, and it was a low-fat diet. I was on a very low-fat diet, beans and rice. This would have been considered a really hard, healthy diet. And in fact, this is one of the diets that I've researched, and we do show is a really great diet. But for me, because I have severe gluten sensitivity, it is not a good diet for me. Now, maybe if I did it gluten-free and dairy-free and egg-free, I might have been okay. I don't know. But for me, it was not a good diet. It was not sufficient.
Mm-hmm. When you were growing up on the farm, did you eat a lot of gluten and bread and things?
Oh, yeah. I made
and dairy.
Bread and dairy. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you think that was a contributor?
Well, I think there are many things that contributed. I had early antibiotics. I had the early adverse childhood experiences. We had atrazine probably in our well, a variety of agricultural chemicals that I'm exposed to. I'm an artist, oil painting, cadmium orange, cobalt blue. I think of all of my oil paints and probably the heavy metals that were in those oil paints and the solvents. I did metallurgy, soldering with lead. Okay, so 4 years into my recovery, I'm biking, I'm hiking. I think, I wonder how toxic I am. So I do a 24-hour urine looking at my heavy metals. I am diffusely toxic. So I make some tweaks to my detox program. And 2 years later, I recheck and I've cleared everything. So probably for most of us, it's multifactorial. There's hormonal factors, there's microbiome factors, there are toxin factors, and just begin to work at looking at all of your modifiable lifestyle factors and begin shifting them step by step towards more health promoting behaviors. And for some, you'll have just a dramatic restoration of health. For others, you'll get some improvement, but you'll need to come see a functional medicine practitioner to get further investigations and a more personalized program.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you think about all the toxicity that's out there and how it compounds. So you really had a heavy load in your 20s. You had medical school, you had all the stress, you had the symptoms of MS, you had dealt with a lot of trauma prior to that. So what about your personal life? Were you able to cultivate relationships that helped to nurture you when you had all the stress going on?
So as an adolescent, I began to figure out that I like the girls a lot more than I like the boys. Keep in mind, this is in the 60s. There's this big message that being gay, being homosexual is pathological. It's a sin. This is a problem. So maybe I can be straight. And I remember I was dating a lovely young man at college, and he's graduating, he's leaving. He says, "Terry, I know you're in love with Liz. You got to find yourself a lesbian. She's a straight girl. This is not going to work out." And I was like, God, I wonder how he could tell what I was thinking. And so I was like, okay, well, I would eventually decide that maybe I should explore this. And then I was romantically involved. And in medical school, I'm romantically involved. But I'm trying to keep that part of my life very distinct from everyone else, because I'm afraid if they figure out that I'm a lesbian, they'll throw me out of medical school. And I borrowed a whole lot of money to go to medical school, so that would be a big problem. And I get through medical school, I get through residency. Again, trying to be very careful to keep my professional life very distinct from my personal life, so I don't talk about who I really am. I'm hiding the real me. And then I'm in the small town, in Marshville, Wisconsin, They have a beautiful medical center, a residency program there. And because I like wilderness travel and skiing and biking and hiking and canoeing, it's just like, this is perfect. And my romantic partner is a physician. And so we go there, she dumps me, and I'm like, okay. So I severely depressed, lose a lot of weight. And my dad calls me one evening, trying to cheer me up, talking about all of the severe challenges that he had in his life. And I say, well, it's not the same as losing your money on the farm. He goes, well, I know you're kind of gay. It's okay.
Aw.
And so we have this remarkable, honest conversation for the first time. Yeah, that was a big deal because he was a born-again Baptist whose church I know have told him for years, because I heard him tell me for years, that homosexuals were agents of the devil, and he was willing to say, I choose you over my church. And then I went to work, and I talked to my medical assistant and said, okay, so I'm a homo, it's no big deal. I'm going to laugh about it. It's just life. That's why I've lost all this weight. I'm going to get through this. And I started just talking about my life as it was. And what I discovered was it was fine, that my medical assistant was fine with it. My patients were fine with it. And if they weren't, they didn't talk to me about it because it was could no longer be weaponized against me. And then I decided I had wanted to have kids, but my romantic partner didn't want to have kids. So I was like, okay, I guess I want to have kids. Well, now that she had dumped me, like, well, maybe I should have kids. And my boss at the time in general medicine said, Terry, you'll be a great mom. If you want to have kids, have kids. And Bruce, who does the fertility work, said it won't be a problem. I'm sure you'll be able to do artificial insemination through his office. So I made an appointment with Bruce. He said, oh, yeah, fine, no problem. Now, at that time in the 80s, late 80s, it was very hard for single women to get access to artificial insemination. We found out that I did have infertility. I have to go through a workup, and we did a variety of strategies to finally get pregnant, which included, by the way, going all the way out to San Francisco to get in vitro fertilization. When I'm finally, to my amazement, pregnant, I call home to tell my mom and dad that, well, it worked. I'm pregnant. My dad starts talking about the price of corn, the price of beans, the price of hogs. Oh, and he has to step out because someone's just drove in. So he really wasn't prepared to talk to me. And my mom is very distressed, like, oh my God, this is going to be terrible. Your patients won't accept this. Your partners won't accept this. They'll drive you out. You're going to lose your job. This is. And I think for her understanding of the world, I had done something that was going to be very, very risky. Now, fortunately, as it turned out, it really was not a problem. And I was home for the Christmas meal. My one brother is, a devoutly religious young man who still believes that homosexuals are, evil. And, at that time, he had very negative feelings about homosexuals. My other brother and his wife were, much more benevolent. And Colleen, bless her, she was like asking me about my pregnancy, how things were going, did I have any names picked out, what my plans were for the nursery. So Colleen is just having a blast chatting with me about my pregnancy. No one else says a word throughout all of the Christmas meal. Now, fortunately, by the time Zach is born, another family friend, Sylvester and Darlene, go over and spend time with my parents, John and Lois, and convince them, like, this is all fine. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. Terry did this through AI. She's going to be a great mom. When her little boy is born, you go right up there and spend some time with him. And they did, and it really was quite lovely.
That's beautiful. And then you went on to have another child.
Then we had another one, yes. Then, to my amazement, because I had to go through IVF, it was very challenging getting pregnant with Zach. And then I said, well, I think I'll want to do this again. So I got 10 more vials of donor 1033. And on the 10th vial, I got pregnant with twins. Yeah, and now this is super interesting. When I went in for my ultrasound, I can't remember if it was the 12 week or 14 weeks, that we discovered that one of the twins had died. I was beginning to spot. I was on bed rest for a few days. I did not lose the pregnancy. I, of course, was very sad because I was very excited about having both twins. But at 30 weeks, I started having headaches, joint pain. Then my blood pressure went up. Then I'm hospitalized, and my labs are getting off. I'm clearly very, very ill. And then the placenta separates, and I have an emergency C-section due to placental abruption at 31 weeks. And fortunately, my daughter survives. I survive. She's fine. She's 29. She is lots of fun. And what is very interesting for, I think, you and all of your listeners to reflect on, when I come back in for my postpartum check 6 weeks later, my OB doc says the loss of your twin at early probably saved your daughter's life and may have saved your life, because had that twin pregnancy continued, you would have developed severe preeclampsia earlier in your pregnancy. The acceleration from sick to severely ill would have been even faster with a twin pregnancy. They would have been trying hard to keep the twins in your uterus so they could survive. It's quite possible they would have lost the twins and you, or we might have survived the twins and they've had severe neurodevelopmental delays. So Zeb and I talked about this. It's the same event, the loss of the twin, which in one context it was very sad. I spent days crying, and when I talk about that now, I can still cry because absolutely both twins were wanted. And yet I also have to acknowledge the gift of life. For Zeb, it certainly has a huge impact for her in her mental health and her health, and for me. So the events of our lives, however they are happening to us, and the despair or joy that we feel is not the event. It is the meaning we apply to the event.
Yeah. That is a very appropriate and beautiful place to talk about maybe just one big lesson that you can share with us. And then I do want you to tell us about your study as well. It feels to me as you tell that story, I'm just thinking about everything as a metaphor in your whole life with the farm and things that happen on the farm, and the idea of this beautiful soul that gave itself so that you and your daughter could go on and have a beautiful life. Like, did you name that baby or ever think of it in that way?
I have not.
But you do think of it as
absolute gift,
a presence in your life,
And we talk about that. I now talk about this when I'm teaching, that the events of our lives are simply events. And when I, tell the story of the loss of my twin, and when I tell that, I often cry because I certainly felt very sad. And then the other women who've had miscarriages, because many women who have miscarriages don't talk about it, don't have the opportunity to feel that grief and that sorrow. And then when I talk about the placental abruption and my having this clear memory of, oh my God, I'm going to die and Zach's going to be an orphan. Like, what have I done? And not many of us in our 30s have a near-death experience, and how that was a lot for me to process. And then coming back and having my OB doc enlighten me that the loss of the twin probably saved Zeb's life. So a lot to be gratitude for there. And then she goes on to say, you know what, I think she probably saved your life.
What a beautiful thing to have, to know that there's this force somewhere, this little spark of light somewhere that's just for you, that you and Zeb and Zach and your whole family have been blessed by that.
That we have been blessed. And it's an interesting thought. Was that my sister?
Oh my God. I'm going to stay with that. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that story. Wow. Oh, so we do have to put an end to this beautiful conversation because I know you have a busy schedule, but let's talk a little bit about what you've got going on. I know you're looking for people to participate in a very important study.
So I have this mission of changing the standard of care for people with MS. And to do that, we are doing a diet intervention study comparing a ketogenic diet, modified paleo diet to usual diet. You'll come to Iowa City at month 0, month 3, and month 24. We will get some patient-reported outcomes, some clinical outcomes, and a no contrast MRI. And the MRI is at month 0 and month 24. You must have relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis, be between the ages of 18 and 70, reside in the United States, Mexico, or Canada. You can learn more about this at terrywahls.com/MS study. That's Terry, Terry, Wahls, WAHLS.com/MS study. We're going to have 156 people in the study. I'm very excited about this. I'd like to have about 35 more people get enrolled. So please come sign up. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, put this on your social media, put the link out there, terrywahls.com/MS study. There's a little video telling you more about the study, and there's a survey that you'll complete. When you complete the survey, you will be on our patient database for other studies. And if you go to terrywahls.com, you can sign up for my email newsletter, because as we develop new studies, we will send out announcements for those studies to my email list as well.
Yeah, this is an amazing opportunity for anybody who has MS and is looking to participate in something that can change the world and affect your life in a very positive way. So, yeah, and all the details will be in the show notes. Dr. Wahls, I appreciate you. I think you are, you're just one of my favorite people in the whole world. And I know you just had a birthday. Happy birthday.
Oh, yeah, we're big Hawkeye women's basketball fans. So we'd gone to North Carolina to watch them play the Virginia Tech, another really fabulous team. It was a very exciting game, back and forth, back and forth. Our team won. But again, a very, very exciting game, wonderful game for all women's basketball fans.
I love it. I love it. You're such a great person. Thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Wahls. Have a
Thank you.
wonderful, wonderful day.